The end of my marriage to David didn't arrive with a bang, but with a series of quiet, chilling silences. It was in the way he'd look through me at the dinner table, his fork pushing around the pasta I'd made from scratch, the same recipe he'd once claimed was his favorite. It was in the growing physical distance in our king-sized bed, a canyon of cold sheets between us. We were two ghosts haunting the same beautiful empty house. A house I poured my soul into making a home. I was 44 and I felt every one of those years etched into my spirit. David was 46, but he'd started acting like a man 20 years younger. He bought a new sports car, a sleek red thing that screamed midlife crisis. He started going to the gym obsessively, his body hardening while his demeanor towards me softened into something worse than anger. Indifference. The day he finally said the words, it was almost a relief. We were in the kitchen and I was washing the breakfast dishes. The morning sun streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It was such a normal, peaceful moment, the kind you take for granted. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice flat. I turned off the tap, my hands dripping soapy water onto the tiles. I didn't turn around. I just stared out the window at the garden I had planted, the roses now in full defiant bloom. "I'm not happy," he continued, the cliché hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "I feel like we've grown apart. I think I need to find myself." I finally turned to face him. He was dressed in a sharp new suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked like a man on his way to a board meeting, not a man ending his 17-year marriage. "Find yourself," I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "David, we have a joint mortgage. We have a life. You don't just find yourself and walk away from that." He sighed, a theatrical, weary sound. "It's not that simple, Sarah. You're just stuck. You're happy in this little bubble, with your garden and your book club. I need more. I need passion. I need excitement." That's when I knew it wasn't about him. It was about someone else. "Who is she?" I asked, the question hanging in the sunlit room. He had the decency to look ashamed just for a second. "Her name is Chloe." Chloe. A young name. A name without baggage. He moved out that weekend. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. A clinical dissection of our shared life. He was generous with the money, I'll give him that. He was in a hurry. He wanted his new, exciting, passion-filled life to begin, unburdened by the ghost of his old one. I got the house, a decent settlement, and a cavernous silence that echoed with the memories of our daughter, Emily, who was away at college. She took his side in a way. Not overtly, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice when we spoke. "Mom, why couldn't you just try harder? Dad says you gave up." The pain was a physical thing, a constant, aching hollow in my chest. For months I moved through my days like an automaton. I'd water the roses, their vibrant colors seeming to mock my gray existence. I'd try to read, but the words would swim on the page. I was adrift. The invitation arrived exactly 6 months to the day after he'd moved out. It was thick, expensive cardstock. Embossed in swirling gold script were the words, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of David Miller and Chloe Summers." Felt like a deliberate cruelty. He'd known me for 20 years. He knew the kind of wound this would inflict. My hands trembled as I held the heavy paper. The party was to be held at the Grandview Hotel, the very place where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. The irony was a sharp, bitter taste in my mouth. My first instinct was to tear it into 1,000 pieces, to pour a glass of wine and burn the shreds in the kitchen sink. But as I sat there at the same kitchen table where he'd ended us, a strange calm settled over me. The raw, screaming pain hardened into something else. Something cold and sharp and patient. I wouldn't just go to that party. I would go and I would be magnificent. I spent a small fortune on a dress, a simple floor-length sheath of emerald green that hugged my newly toned body, a body shaped not by a gym obsession, but by long punishing walks as I tried to outpace my grief. I had my hair styled, my makeup done by an artist. When I looked in the mirror the night of the party, I didn't see the broken, discarded wife. I saw a woman of substance, of elegance. I saw a queen descending into the court of the usurper. The Grandview Ballroom was everything I knew it would be. Glittering, opulent, and filled with the buzz of shallow conversation. I recognized many of the faces, our old friends, his colleagues. A hush fell over a small group as I entered, my head held high. I saw the shock in their eyes, then the quick, appreciative glances. I looked better than I had in years. And then I saw them. David, looking tanned and triumphant in a tuxedo that was a little too tight. And on his arm Chloe. She was young, probably 25, with a cascade of blonde hair and a dress that was more spray-on than garment. She was giggling at something he'd said, her hand possessively on his arm. She was exactly what I'd pictured. And as I watched her, a small grim smile touched my lips. Because I knew something about little Chloe Summers that David, in his desperate rush towards youth, had failed to discover. I knew her secret. And tonight I was going to be the one to give it to him. I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, the bubbles tickling my nose. The cold glass was an anchor in my hand, a small solid reality in a sea of surreal betrayal. I moved through the crowd with a serene smile, a ghost at the feast, nodding at familiar faces. I saw the whispers behind hands, the widened eyes, the quick, pitying glances that soon turned to admiration for my composure. "Sarah, you came." David's voice was at my elbow, strained and slightly too loud. He'd broken away from Chloe's side, his expression a messy cocktail of panic and forced politeness. "David," I said, turning to face him fully. I let my gaze travel over him, from his overly gelled hair to his shiny shoes. "It's quite a party. You've outdone yourself." My voice was calm, pleasant even. I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. We are glad you could make it," he stammered, his eyes darting around, clearly wishing for any kind of interruption. "Oh, I wouldn't have missed it for the world," I replied, taking a slow sip of champagne. "It's not every day a man finds true passion after a lifetime of—" "What was it? Being stuck?" He flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. "Sarah, please. Don't make a scene." "Me?" I gave a light, tinkling laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "David, I'm here to celebrate. I'm happy for you." The lie slipped out smooth and effortless. "She's lovely. So young." His discomfort was a palpable force. He looked over his shoulder towards Chloe, who was now surrounded by a gaggle of her friends, their high-pitched laughter cutting through the murmur of the room. "She makes me feel alive," he said, almost defensively. "I'm sure she does," I murmured, my eyes still on Chloe. "Alive. Unlike our life together," which he had clearly viewed as a slow, comfortable death. Just then Chloe spotted us. She detached herself from her friends and glided over, slipping her arm through David's with a proprietary air. Up close, she was even younger looking, with wide blue eyes that held a practiced innocence. "David, darling, aren't you going to introduce me?" she cooed, her voice like sugary syrup. David looked like a man facing a firing squad. "Chloe, this is Sarah. My former wife." Chloe's smile was brilliant and utterly vacant. "Sarah, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. David has told me so much about you." Her gaze swept over me, from my emerald dress to my simple pearl earrings, and I saw a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, that I wasn't the frumpy, aging heck she'd undoubtedly been told to expect. "I'll bet he has," I said, my smile not wavering. "And it's a pleasure to meet you, Chloe. Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," she chirped. "It's all just so magical, isn't it? Like a fairy tale." "A fairy tale," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Yes, I suppose it is." My mind drifted back to the countless nights I'd spent alone in our big house, the fairy tale of my own marriage having long since crumbled into dust. "And what do you do, Chloe?" David was always a little vague on the details. "Oh," she said, her face lighting up. "I'm in influencer marketing. It's so creative. I just love building a brand and connecting with my community." "Fascinating," I said, my tone neutral. "And before that? I understand you went to Crestview University." A shadow, swift and almost imperceptible, passed behind her eyes. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but I saw it. The first tiny crack in the perfect facade. "Crestview? Oh no," she said, her laugh a little too high. "You must be thinking of someone else. I went to State. Go Wildcats." She gave a little fist pump, a gesture that seemed absurdly childish in the formal setting. "My mistake," I said smoothly, taking another sip of champagne. "It must have been someone else." David, sensing the slight shift in atmosphere, jumped in. "Chloe's a whiz with social media, Sarah. She's got tens of thousands of followers. She's going to be a huge asset to my firm's new digital outreach program. Of course, I said. A perfect partnership. An awkward silence descended upon our little trio. I let it stretch, watching them squirm. I could see the questions beginning to form in David's mind, the first seeds of doubt sown by my simple, incorrect statement. He was a details man, a fact-checker. He wouldn't let a discrepancy like that go. Well, Chloe said, her brightness seeming a little forced now. We should probably mingle. So many people to see. So lovely to meet you, Sarah. Likewise, I said. The night is still young. I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to chat. As they moved away, David shot a last, confused glance back at me. I merely raised my glass in a small silent toast. To the truth, I thought. And to the fact that it always comes out. I spent the next hour drifting through the ballroom, a silent observer of my own life's bizarre sequel. I saw our old friends, couples David and I had vacation with, shared Christmases with. Some avoided my eyes. Others came up to me, expressing a mixture of sympathy and admiration for my courage in showing up. It's just so tacky inviting you, whispered Martha, a friend from my book club. What was he thinking? I think he wasn't, I replied, my gaze following David and Chloe as they moved through the crowd. He was showing her off like a prized racehorse, but his smile was tight, his eyes occasionally darting around until they found me, as if I were a ghost he couldn't exorcise. The secret I held felt heavy and warm in my chest, a live coal waiting for the right moment to be thrown. It hadn't been a conscious act of investigation. It was an accident, a gift from the universe. A few weeks after David left, in a fit of pained nostalgia, I'd been looking through an old forgotten box of his college things in the attic. Beneath his varsity letters and fraternity paddles, I'd found a yearbook. Not his. Not mine. It was from Crestview University from 5 years ago. A name was scrawled on the inside cover in loopy, feminine handwriting. Chloe Summers. Dreams are for chasing. XOXO. And on the page where her photo should have been, there was nothing but a blank space and a small printed notation. Photo withheld at student's request. At the time, I dismissed it as a strange coincidence, a relic from a life he'd had before me. But the name had stuck in my mind. When the invitation arrived with that very name emblazoned on it, the pieces began to click into place. A deep, unsettling curiosity had taken root. Why was her photo withheld? What was she hiding from? My pain had forged itself into a sharp, precise tool for discovery. And what I had discovered would shatter David's perfect fairy tale into a million pieces. The party was reaching its peak, the noise level rising with the alcohol consumption. It was almost time. The clinking of a knife against a champagne glass cut through the din, creating a ripple of anticipatory quiet. David's best man, Mike, a man whose loyalty had clearly been purchased along with David's new identity, stood on the small bandstand, his face flushed with drink and bonhomie. If I could have everyone's attention, he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the now hushed room. I'd like to propose a toast to my oldest and dearest friend, David, and his beautiful, and I mean stunning fiancée Chloe. A wave of applause and cheers swept through the room. David beamed, pulling Chloe closer. She looked up at him with an expression of such pure, adoring devotion that it would have been sickening even if I didn't know what I knew. Mike launched into a speech that was a masterclass in selective memory. He spoke of David's brave new beginning, his incredible zest for life, and his good fortune in finding a woman like Chloe, who had reignited a fire in him. Each word was a tiny, precise incision, reopening the wounds of my own history with this man. He spoke of David's success, his character, his loyalty, all traits that had seemingly been dormant or non-existent during the latter years of our marriage. I stood near the back, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement, my emerald dress blending into the shadows. I listened, my face a placid mask, while inside the cold, hard knot of my resolve tightened. This public rewriting of history, this erasure of our shared past and his own culpability, was the final confirmation I needed. He wasn't just moving on. He was trying to build his new life on the gravesite of our old one, sanitizing his own narrative. And to Chloe, Mike continued, raising his glass higher. The woman who captured the heart of one of the best men I know. We're all so excited to welcome you into the family. The crowd echoed the sentiment, glasses raised. To David and Chloe. As the applause died down, David took the microphone from Mike, his arm slung possessively around Chloe's waist. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight to share in our joy. His voice was smooth, confident, the voice of a man who believed he had successfully outrun his past. When you find a connection this powerful, this electric, you realize that every road you've ever walked was leading you to this moment. To this person. I took a slow, steadying breath. The air in the room felt thick, charged. My fingers tightened around the small, elegant clutch purse in my hand. Inside it, nestled against the soft lining, was a single folded piece of paper. My insurance. My grenade. Chloe, David said, turning to her. His voice softening into a public display of intimacy that felt like a violation. You have brought a light into my life that I didn't even know was missing. You are my future. It was my cue. The perfect, sickeningly sweet setup. I began to move forward, not with haste, but with a deliberate, calm purpose. I weaved through the tables, my eyes fixed on the happy couple. A few people noticed my movement, their chatter dying down as I passed. I saw Martha's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Mike's confident smile falter. David, sensing the shift in the room's energy, looked up from Chloe's adoring gaze. His eyes met mine as I stopped a few feet from the bandstand. The color drained from his face. The charming, confident facade cracked, revealing the panicked man beneath. Sarah, he said, the microphone picking up the tremor in his voice. Is everything all right? The room was utterly silent now. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of their collective gaze. A mixture of horror, curiosity, and a faint unspoken sense of anticipation. Everything is fine, David, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying through the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. I just wanted to add my congratulations to everyone else's. I could see the relief flash in his eyes, brief and foolish. He thought I was going to be gracious. He thought I was going to play my part in his little play. That's very kind of you, Sarah, he said, attempting to regain his composure. It's just, I continued, tilting my head, my tone light and conversational. Listening to all these wonderful speeches about new beginnings and fairy tales, it got me thinking about stories. And how sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones with hidden chapters. David's face went from pale to ashen. I don't think this is the time or place, he said sharply, his grip tightening on the microphone. Oh, I think it's the perfect place, I replied, my smile never slipping. After all, an engagement party is about celebrating the whole person, isn't it? The past, the present, the future. I let my gaze drift from his terrified face to Chloe's, which was now etched with a confused frown. What are you talking about? Chloe asked, her voice small in the vast quiet. I took one more step forward, my eyes locking with hers. I'm talking about your time at Crestview University, Chloe. It sounds like it was such a formative period for you. The name Crestview hung in the air like a poison gas. Chloe's reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Her jaw dropped open. The practiced, bubbly innocence evaporated from her face, replaced by raw, unvarnished terror. She took an involuntary step back, as if I'd physically struck her. I told you you're mistaken, she stammered, her voice shaking. I went to state. Did you? I asked softly, almost sympathetically. I opened my clutch purse and slowly, deliberately, pulled out the folded piece of paper. The sound of the paper unfolding was deafening in the silence. That's so strange, because I have a copy of the Crestview student newspaper here from about 5 years ago. There's a very interesting article about a student named Chloe Summers. It's quite the story. David was staring at me, his expression a car crash of confusion and dawning horror. Sarah, what is this? What are you doing? I didn't look at him. My eyes were still on Chloe, who looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen in the spotlight of her own impending ruin. It seems, I said, my voice projecting to every corner of the room, that the real fairy tale at Crestview wasn't about finding a prince. It was about a young woman who was very, very skilled at creating fictions. Fictions so elaborate, they netted her over $50,000 in scholarships and grants under false pretenses. Fictions about a tragic past, about orphan status, about a debilitating illness. All complete fabrications. A collective, sharp gasp went through the crowd. I saw David flinch as if I'd slapped him. "It's a lie!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It's all lies." "Is it?" I asked calmly, finally turning my gaze to David. I held up the paper, though no one could read it from a distance. It didn't matter. The truth was in her reaction. The university authorities didn't seem to think so when they launched their investigation. "It's all here, David. The charges, the evidence, the expulsion. That's why her photo was withheld from the yearbook. It's why she disappeared from Crestview and reinvented herself at State. She's not who you think she is. She's a con artist. And you, my dear ex-husband, are just her latest and most lucrative mark." The silence in the ballroom was no longer just quiet. It was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. It was broken by a single choked sob from Chloe. Then the room erupted. It wasn't a loud eruption, but a low, frantic buzz of whispers that swelled like a disturbed hornet's nest. Heads swiveled between me, standing calm and holding my piece of paper, to Chloe, who had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, and to David, who looked as if the very floor had vanished beneath his feet. His face cycled through emotions so rapidly it was almost comical. First, there was pure, unadulterated shock, his mouth agape. Then, a flash of denial as he looked at the weeping Chloe. Finally, a dawning, horrifying comprehension settled in, twisting his features into a mask of fury and humiliation. The spotlight he had so eagerly basked in moments before was now a scorching, interrogating beam exposing his own profound gullibility. "Chloe," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. He grabbed her arm, not with tenderness, but with a hard, demanding grip. "Is this true? Look at me. Is any of this true?" She couldn't speak. Her whole body was racked with sobs, a performance of distress that now seemed as hollow as her past. Her silence was the most damning confession of all. Mike, the best man, rushed to the stage, his face a picture of panic. "All right, folks, I think that's enough. There's clearly been some kind of misunderstanding. Let's all just take a breath." He tried to take the microphone from David, but David shoved his hand away, his eyes wild. "A misunderstanding?" David roared into the microphone, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and pain. The sound system screeched with feedback, making everyone wince. "She's calling my fiancé a criminal. A con artist." He turned his furious gaze back to me. "Where did you get this? This is slander. I'll sue you for every penny you have left." His threat was pathetic, a last desperate attempt to regain control. I didn't flinch. I simply stood my ground, the paper still held aloft like a battle standard. "The truth is an absolute defense against slander, David," I said, my voice still unervingly calm amidst the chaos. "It's all a matter of public record if you know where to look. The Crestview Clarion archives are digitized. It was surprisingly easy to find once I had the right name. You could have found it yourself if you bothered to do even the most basic due diligence on the woman you were planning to marry." This hit him where it hurt most, his ego. David prided himself on being shrewd, a savvy businessman who never missed a detail. I had just publicly revealed him as a fool, a middle-aged man so blinded by the flattery of a young woman that he'd walked headlong into a trap. The crowd was lapping it up. I saw phones being subtly pulled out, not to record, but to frantically search for Crestview Clarion Chloe Summers. The story was verifying itself in real time. Whispers of "I found it," and "Oh my God, it's real" rippled through the room. David followed their gazes, watching as his colleagues, his friends, our old acquaintances, discovered the truth on their little screens. His reputation was crumbling to dust before his eyes. The powerful, successful David Miller, brought down not by a business rival, but by his own discarded wife. Chloe suddenly spun around, tearing herself from David's grip. Her tear-streaked face was contorted with a venom I hadn't known she possessed. The innocent, bubbly persona was gone, completely stripped away. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You bitter old hag. You couldn't stand to see him happy. You're just jealous. Jealous." I repeated, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "No, Chloe. I'm not jealous. I'm free. And I'm giving David the same gift. The gift of seeing what's really in front of him." This seemed to snap something in David. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud and a screech of audio feedback that made everyone cover their ears. He took a step toward Chloe, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. All those stories, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, meant only for her but carrying in the dead silence. Your sick mother? The father who abandoned you? The scholarship for overcoming adversity? All of it was a lie. Chloe shrunk back from him, the reality of her situation finally crashing down. The game was over. The Mark had figured it out. David, please. You have to understand. I was young, I was desperate. Desperate, he roared, the word echoing in the high ceiling. You were a thief. You stole from a university. You've been lying to me from the very first day. Everything about you is a lie. He looked at the engagement ring on her finger, a large, ostentatious diamond he had bragged about buying. With a cry of pure rage, he grabbed her hand and yanked the ring off so violently I thought he might break her finger. She yelped in pain and shock. Get out, he snarled, his voice trembling with fury. He threw the ring. It skittered across the polished wooden floor of the bandstand, disappearing under a speaker. Get out of my sight, you lying little cheat. Chloe stood there for a moment, utterly broken and exposed, the entire party staring at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Then, with a final helpless sob, she gathered the skirts of her expensive dress and fled from the stage, pushing her way through the stunned crowd toward the exit. The ballroom doors swung shut behind her with a heavy final thud. The show was over. The fairy tale was dead. And David was left alone on the stage, surrounded by the ruins of his perfect new life, with only the ghost of his old one to bear witness. For a long moment no one moved. David stood on the stage, staring at the space where Chloe had vanished, his chest heaving. The air was thick with the aftermath, a mixture of second-hand embarrassment, schadenfreude, and sheer unadulterated shock. The glittering engagement party had transformed into a public execution, and I had been the one to swing the axe. Then the murmuring started again, louder this time, less restrained. I saw people already edging toward the doors, desperate to escape the awkwardness and dissect the drama in the lobby or the parking lot. The band, who had been frozen in place, slowly began to pack up their instruments, their job of providing a celebratory soundtrack clearly over. David's eyes, hollow and lost, slowly scanned the room until they landed on me. The fury was gone, replaced by a devastating, profound humiliation. He looked like a little boy who had been caught in a terrible lie. He stumbled off the stage, ignoring Mike's attempt to put a comforting hand on his shoulder, and walked directly toward me. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, everyone staring. He stopped a few feet from me, his tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume he'd been forced to wear. Why? He asked, his voice a broken rasp. It wasn't a shout. It was a plea. Why would you do this, Sarah? Why here? Why like this? I looked at him, this man I had loved for half my life, and I felt a surprising absence of triumph. What I felt was a clean, cold clarity. You invited me, David, I said, my voice low but clear. You sent me that invitation to this place of all places, and you expected me to do what? Stay home and cry? You wanted to rub your new, perfect life in my face. You wanted to show me how easily I could be replaced. I just decided to show you the quality of your replacement. He flinched as if my words were physical blows. You destroyed me, he whispered, his eyes glistening. No, David, I said, shaking my head slowly. I didn't destroy you. I just pulled back the curtain. You did this to yourself. You were so eager to run toward something young and shiny that you didn't bother to look at what it was made of. You built your new future on a foundation of lies, and I simply pointed out the cracks before you moved in. I gestured with the folded newspaper article to the room around us. This humiliation, this is the consequence of your own actions, of your cruelty in leaving me the way you did, of your arrogance in believing I would just fade away quietly. He had no answer. He just stood there, crumbling under the weight of his own catastrophic miscalculation. I saw our daughter Emily then standing near the entrance. She had arrived late, wanting to support her father, and had walked in just in time to see the entire spectacle. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and she was looking at her father not with anger, but with a heartbreaking pity. Then her eyes met mine, and in them I saw a dawning, terrible understanding. She finally saw the man her father was, and the strength her mother had to find. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone in his shame. An older gentleman, Mr. Henderson, a senior partner at David's firm, approached. He had always been kind to me. He didn't even look at David. He placed a hand on my arm, his expression grim. "Sarah," he said quietly, "that was brutally effective. Are you all right?" "I am now, John." "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it. He nodded, then finally turned his disappointed gaze to David. "David, I think you should go home. We'll need to talk on Monday." The implication was clear. His professional reputation, so tied to his image of stability and acumen, had just taken a direct, possibly fatal, hit. That was the final blow. David seemed to shrink inside his tuxedo. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the nearest exit, a side door leading to the kitchens, unable to face the main crowd. He didn't look back. I stood there for a moment longer, the folded article still in my hand. The party was breaking up in earnest now. A few people gave me hesitant, sympathetic smiles. Others avoided my gaze entirely, unnerved by the nuclear option I had chosen. I didn't care. I walked out of the ballroom, through the opulent lobby of the Grandview, and out into the cool night air. I breathed in deeply, the scent of the city a welcome change from the stifling, perfumed atmosphere inside. I felt light. The heavy, aching hollow that had lived in my chest for 6 months was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady hum of peace. I had gone to that party carrying the weight of his betrayal and my own pain. I was leaving having given all that weight back to him. It was his to carry now. I didn't go straight home. I walked for a long time, my emerald dress shimmering under the streetlights. I thought about the look in David's eyes at the end. Not the anger, but the utter devastation. I had loved that man once. A part of me would always care for the man he used to be. But the man he had become had deserved everything that happened tonight. He had wanted a clean break, a new life free from the complications of our shared history. Well, I had given him a break. It just wasn't the clean one he had envisioned. His new life was in ruins before it even began, and the ghost of his past had proven to be far more real and powerful than the fantasy he tried to replace it with. I finally reached my house. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence that greeted me was no longer empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. I poured myself a glass of water, went to the living room, and looked out at the moonlit garden. The roses were still there, blooming in the darkness. They had survived the day just as I had. And tomorrow they would still be there, strong and beautiful. The revenge was complete. But as I stood there in the quiet, I realized the most important part wasn't his humiliation. It was my liberation. The story of David and Sarah was finally irrevocably over. And my own story, whatever it would be, was just beginning. The silence in my house the next morning was profound, but for the first time in months, it was a silence I welcomed. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. Sunlight streamed into the kitchen, warmer, more golden than it had felt in years. I made coffee, the rich aroma filling the room, and took my cup to the garden. The roses seemed to nod in the gentle breeze, their petals holding dewdrops like tiny diamonds. I had survived the storm, and my world was still beautiful. The calm, however, was not to last long. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate. Then it buzzed again. And again. A relentless, insistent hum that pulled me from my tranquility. I sighed, knowing what was coming, and went inside to face it. The screen was lit up with a cascade of notifications. Text messages. Missed calls. Dozens of them. I scrolled through the names. Martha from book club, old neighbors, friends from a life I'd thought was gone forever. The first text was from Martha. "Sarah. My God. I'm still processing. The entire town is talking. Are you okay? That was the most legendary thing I have ever witnessed." Another from an old college friend. "Just heard what happened at the Grandview last night. Holy crap. You're a goddess. David got exactly what he deserved." A former colleague of David's. "Sarah, I know we haven't spoken, but I had to reach out. What David did to you was awful. What you did last night. Well, let's just say the office is a very interesting place today." He hasn't come in. I didn't reply to any of them immediately. I just read them. absorbing the shockwaves my actions had sent through our social circle. The story was out, and it was spreading like wildfire far beyond the ballroom. It was becoming legend. Then the phone rang in my hand. It was Emily. My breath caught. This was the call I had been both dreading and anticipating. I swiped to answer. Mom. Her voice was small, shaky. Hi, sweetheart, I said, my own voice soft. There was a long pause on the other end, filled only by her shaky breathing. Is it true? She finally whispered. All of it? What you said about Chloe? Yes, Emily. It's all true. I have the documents. I wouldn't have done it if it weren't. She let out a sob, a raw pain sound that twisted my heart. I saw him, Mom. After. I went to his apartment this morning. He's a wreck. He's just sitting in the dark. He looks 100 years old. I closed my eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter. A part of me, the part that had loved her father for so long, ached to hear it. But the stronger part, the part that had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, remained resolute. He made his choices, Emily, I said, my voice gentle but firm. He chose to leave our family. He chose to invite me to that party to humiliate me. He chose a woman he didn't bother to truly know. These are the consequences of those choices. I know, she cried. It's so awful. To see him like that. And to know that you. She couldn't finish the sentence. That I what? That I fought back. I finished for her. That I didn't just lie down and let him walk all over me? Your father spent the last 6 months making me feel invisible, obsolete, and worthless. Last night I reminded him and everyone else that I am not. There was another long silence. I could almost hear her reassembling her worldview. The image of her powerful, infallible father shattered and replaced by this broken, foolish man, and her quiet, steady mother transformed into an avenging angel. He kept saying, she destroyed me, Emily whispered. No, honey, I said, my voice filled with a sudden, fierce love for my daughter. He was destroying himself the minute he walked out that door. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the mess he was making. She was quiet for a moment, taking this in. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, her voice stronger now. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were going through. I was so mad at you for not trying harder. But it was him. It was always him. Tears welled in my eyes then, but they were tears of relief, of healing. This, more than David's humiliation, was the victory I had truly needed. My daughter was coming back to me. You don't have to be sorry, baby, I said. We're going to be okay. You and me. We're going to be just fine. We talked for a little while longer, the conversation shifting to her classes, to mundane, normal things. It was a start. I had just hung up when my phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Crestview. Curiosity piqued, I answered. Is this Sarah Miller? A woman's voice asked. It was crisp, professional. Yes, who is this? My name is Anya Sharma. I'm a reporter with the Daily Chronicle. We received a tip about an incident at an engagement party last night involving David Miller and Chloe Summers, and we understand you were the one who revealed Miss Summers's past with Crestview University. The world, it seemed, was not done spinning from the shockwaves. The story was leaking from social circles into the real world. I felt a flutter of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of resolve. I had told the truth. I had nothing to fear. I said calmly. I was hoping to get a comment from you for our story, she said. The details we've heard are quite dramatic. I looked out the window at my garden, at the strong, resilient roses. I thought of David sitting in his dark apartment, and of Emily's voice finally understanding. I thought of the weight that was finally gone from my shoulders. My only comment, I said, my voice clear and steady, is that the truth has a way of coming out. No matter how hard you try to bury it, it always finds the light. I politely declined to say more and ended the call. The story was out of my hands now. It would run its course. David's professional life, his social standing would likely never recover. But that was no longer my concern. My concern was the quiet of my kitchen, the sun on my garden, and the tentative, hopeful rebuilding of a relationship with my daughter. The revenge was public, but the peace it brought was deeply, wonderfully private. A week passed. The initial storm of calls and texts had subsided, replaced by a new, quieter reality. The story had, indeed, made it into the Daily Chronicle. It wasn't front-page news, but a small biting piece in the business section, detailing how a prominent local businessman had become entangled with a known con artist, with the revelation happening in a spectacularly public fashion. David's firm issued a vague statement about him taking a personal leave of absence. I didn't need to know more to understand what that meant. My life, however, was beginning to blossom in ways I hadn't imagined. The woman who had been stuck in her little bubble was now the one everyone wanted to talk to. Martha from book club had organized a celebratory lunch, where my friends old and new toasted my courage not with pity, but with admiration. I was no longer just David's ex-wife. I was Sarah. Just Sarah. The most profound change was with Emily. She came home for the weekend, the first time since the divorce was finalized. The tension that had hung between us for months was gone. We cooked dinner together in our kitchen, the radio playing softly in the background. We didn't talk about David or the party much. We talked about her classes, a boy she liked, my plans to maybe turn my love for gardening into a small landscaping consultancy. It was normal. It was healing. On Sunday evening, after Emily had driven back to college, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. A part of me, a conditioned, wary part, wondered if it was David, come to rage or to plead. I peered through the peephole. It was him. He stood on my porch, but he was a shadow of the man who had left this house 6 months ago. He was unshaven, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans. In his hand he held a single white envelope. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door and opened it. We stood there, separated by the threshold, the past between us like a fallen tree. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. He couldn't meet my eyes. "David." He held out the envelope. "I came to give you this." I took it. It was heavy. I didn't open it. "It's the final settlement papers," he explained, his gaze fixed on the welcome mat. "My lawyer messengered them to me. I signed them. It's done. You get everything we agreed on. No more fights." I nodded slowly. This was the final official severance. The last legal tie cut. "Thank you," I said, my voice neutral. He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a misery so deep it was almost frightening. "The firm. They asked for my resignation." Quietly. "The partners said the distraction was too great. My reputation. It's gone." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I've been sitting in that empty apartment for a week," he continued, the words tumbling out as if he'd been rehearsing them, "thinking. About you. About us. About what I threw away." A tear escaped and traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. "I was a fool, Sarah. A vain, stupid, old fool. I thought I wanted excitement. I thought I wanted passion. But it was all a lie. She was a lie." He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw the ghost of the man I'd fallen in love with buried under layers of regret and shame. "You were my home, Sarah. And I set fire to it." The words hung in the evening air. They were the apology I had waited a lifetime to hear. And as I heard them, I realized I no longer needed them. His regret was his burden to carry, not my absolution to grant. "I know," I said simply. He seemed to crumple even further, as if he had been hoping for anger, for tears, for anything but this calm, unassailable acceptance. Is there any chance? Any chance at all that you could ever?" "No, David," I said, my voice gentle but absolute, like the closing of a final chapter. "There is no chance." He swallowed hard, nodding, his face a mask of utter defeat. He had lost everything. His wife, his daughter's respect, his career, his future with Chloe, and now the final faint hope of redemption. He had gambled it all on a fantasy and had been left with nothing. He turned to leave, a broken man walking away from the life he had destroyed. "David," I called out softly. He stopped, his back to me, his shoulders tense. "I hope you find peace." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a wish for his happiness. It was a benediction for an end to the drama, for both of us. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then walked down the path to his car, and out of my life for good. I closed the door and leaned against it, the envelope cool in my hands. I looked around my home. The evening sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, just as they had on the morning he left. But everything was different now. I was no longer the woman he had left behind. I was the woman who had faced the fire and emerged, not unscarred but stronger. I was the woman who had reclaimed her story. I walked into the living room and placed the unopened envelope on the mantelpiece. It was just a piece of paper now. The real closure had happened a week ago, in a glittering ballroom, under the stunned gaze of 100 people. It had happened in my daughter's voice on the phone. It had happened in the quiet of my garden. The story of David and Sarah was over, but my story was just beginning. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was excited to turn the page.